Today I'm going to be replacing the front floor support, body mounts on this 98 Jeep Wrangler. Come underneath, we can see that they're pretty well rotted through. Here the back one's starting to go. Front one's starting to crack a little up by it. Started clearing out the inside, pulled out the driver's seat, pulled out the carpets because we'll be welding along the floor and obviously grinding as well. So those need to come out. Next thing I'm going to do is loosen up all the body mount bolts. I'll remove the ones from this side, but I'll loosen the ones on the other side. I already took a wrench and tried turning them. This one wouldn't turn because it was just spinning because it's so rotted. So I took an angle grinder and cut off the head of the bolt, so it'll just pop right through. All the rest of them ended up turning, so that was good. Because we'll be jacking up this side quite a bit, and the other side will just be pivoted on, so those need to be loosened as well. After that, I'll take off the fender. It'll be a little more difficult than when I did the other side because this side is going to have all this stuff mounted on the fender, so we'll figure out what will stay and what will go. Shouldn't be too bad, but it'll be something to think about. I'll get to work loosening those body mount bolts. I've got 3 here, 1 above the rear axle, and then 1 at the bumper, at the rear bumper. Remove all the ones on this side, just loosen the ones on the other side, maybe back them out a ½ inch or so. It's enough so that the body can pivot because we'll be jacking up this side. So we got the fender removed. There's a little fender support bracket there that came out. And I got the bolts out of the roll bar. These end up being a T45 Torx. And now I'm ready to either lift the body or start drilling out some of the spot welds. I think I'm probably going to drill a few out, then I'm going to lift it, and then we'll go from there. But, so to start drilling, I'm going to start drilling from the top. So I'm going to go along and find anywhere that there's a kind of a recessed round hole like this. That's going to be a spot weld. You see another one right there. Once you start kind of picking up on them, they get a little easier to find. Gonna be a little bit of a challenge up here. Might have to go from the underside. It's gonna be easier to see from the underside because it's not all rusty like this. So I'm just gonna take this Harbor Freight spot weld cutting bit, and we'll use a little prong in the middle, center on the spot weld. Drill through. I'll take care of the spot weld, and then when we put the new panel on, I'll be welding from the top down, just because it's easier. If you were to bring this to a body shop, the proper way to repair it would be to remove the spot weld from the bottom. So they just sand down the weld on the piece that's being removed, pop that piece out, and then spot weld the new one in from the bottom as well. And that would be the proper repair, so to speak. But this will work just as well, but it's a little bit of an alternative way of doing it. Now, if it's difficult to locate where the spot welds are, sometimes you can take a wire wheel on a drill and take off some of the paint, and the little divots will become a little more apparent. Let's say they're typically every few inches along the whole channel underneath. A little update on where we're at this point. Got the old panel out. Under here, I got all the spot weld drill holes. If we look under the Jeep, we can see I've got it all primed and ready to install the new panel. I see a few holes there where I'll be welding from the top to install the panel. There are other areas where I'll be welding from the bottom. I mostly used the spot weld drill bit to take these out. So I drilled basically through the bottom piece, only through that depth. It can be a little difficult to tell how deep you are sometimes, but after a little bit of practice, not too bad. So the little nubs that were left after that, I sanded them down. Used the belt sander to sand them flat. If I didn't have the belt sander, I'd probably use a flap disc on an angle grinder. With the flap disc a little less precise and a little more aggressive, so I went for the belt sander. There were a few spots under here that I did use the belt sander rather than the spot weld drill bit. It seemed to actually take a little longer than the spot weld drill bit, so spot weld drill bit's definitely the quickest way to go, it seems. So that's pretty much all prepped and ready to install the new panel. I have the new one laid out next to the old one so that I can drill out the spots that need to be welded from the bottom. The reason I lined them up next to each other is so I could replicate the number and approximate location of the old holes. And I say approximate because we don't really want them in the exact spot of the old holes. We want to stagger them a little bit because we don't want to weld on top of where there was a weld. So that's kind of where I spaced them. You can see the spot weld bit's getting a little dull at this point, kind of wandering on me. Obviously I'll paint that up and get that prepped before install. Same thing here. Now on this spot there's a little channel that comes vertically that needs to be welded from the bottom. And to transfer where these holes need to be, what I did was get a little speed square, lined it up on the line where you can see that the wall that comes down on the inside sits. So I put that there. And I took a well, what I'm using for a depth gauge, and measured the depth off of this edge up to the square, and then I just transferred that over to here. And then replicated the number of spot welds, but in different locations. So this is pretty much ready to go ahead and put it on for a test fit. So once this is on there, I'll transfer the location of all these holes to the corresponding location on the Jeep. Using a paint marker, colored Sharpie would work fine as well. But transfer where those are. Same thing from the Jeep down to this, where I'll be welding for the Jeep to this. I'll make a mark with the paint marker and then pull this piece off. Then I'll remove all the paint and make sure we have nice clean metal to weld to on both this and the Jeep on the locations that will be welded. I've got the new piece all prepped and ready to go in. Everywhere there's going to be a spot weld, I ground off the E-coat, the black E-coat from the new piece. So we have a good clean weld. On the bottom side where it will be welded, ground off enough paint or enough of the E-coat so that we don't get contamination of the weld. I'll probably do it on this side as well so nothing gets pulled in. We have perfect welds possible. I went down to the hardware store and got new bolts to go in these holes because for whatever reason these ones changed from standard to metric on this. So I brought the old ones down for length and found ones that threaded in, and just make it easier lining up. I'll slide it in and get it welded. Got the panel in place, getting ready to weld it. I've got it clamped where I can clamp it, which is right here along the bottom edge of the rocker panel. Then put sheet metal screws, self-tapping sheet metal screws in the areas where I couldn't clamp it. And then after I get all the main welds done, I'll take out the sheet metal screws and weld up the holes where those are. And back here by the roll bar, I just put the roll bar bolts back in to pull the panel upwards against the floor. Before I did all that, I went underneath and put the body mount bolts in. These are kind of the critical thing to line up before welding the panel on. There's really no room for adjustment on them. So pretty much ready to weld. I'll probably try to ground to the body rather than the panel, just because I'll easily get an arc from the gun to the panel, but the edges on the body probably going to be a little bit more critical. I don't have a welding blanket, which would be a good idea in here to cover anything that's flammable or able to melt, so I'm just going to use some wet towels, and hopefully that'll be good enough. Always good to have a fire extinguisher. Got the panel all welded in, filled in all the little holes where the screws were. This ended up being a little more rotted than I thought, so I made a patch panel to go underneath where the roll bar mounts. I've got all the welds done along the bottom of here, and I'm just getting ready to use some seam sealer. Just some black seam sealer I'm going to put along the edge, all along here, so we don't get water coming up between the edge. I'll do that. Let that dry for probably a day, then I'll paint that piece up, and should be ready to put everything back together. On the inside I'll probably use some of this, what is this, rust reformer from Rust-Oleum. I haven't really used it before, so this will be kind of an experiment, see if it works, but it's was pretty rusty. I took off a lot with the wire wheel just to make sure it was solid, and it is. So we'll put that on and get to painting. So we've got the Jeep all reassembled, everything's installed again at this point. Got the fender back on. Just need to get the fender flare extension back on. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about that. Painted the whole thing underneath. May go back and put a second coat on it, not sure yet, but it's enough to protect it for now. I will spray fluid film inside this whole thing, keep it from rusting in the future, since this will be driven in the salt again, which is obviously what caused this damage in the first place. On the inside, painted the floor. See all the little spot welds I did right there. I don't think I got this earlier in the video, but I ended up making a patch to go underneath the roll bar right here. It was just a little too rotted to leave alone, so I made a plate to cover up where all the rust was. I cut it out, put the plate over, welded it up, and it's all good to go now. Much better than it was. So that pretty much goes around the whole thing right there. And yeah, that's pretty much it.